Your brain treats not having the latest trendy water bottle like a survival threat. 10,000 years ago, being excluded from the group meant death. Your amygdala does not know the difference between a predator in the tall grass and a sold-out Stanley Cup on a digital storefront. You see the notification for the limited drop and your heart rate spikes, not because you were thirsty, but because your ancient evolutionary programming is screaming that you are being left behind by the tribe. You are standing in a modern marketing cage where billion-dollar algorithms have mapped your neural pathways more accurately than you have. You think you are making a rational economic decision, but in reality, you are reacting to a perceived threat of social extinction. A $100 bottle does not hydrate you better, but it signals belonging in a world designed to make you feel like an outsider. That is the first thing to understand, and maybe the most important. You are not standing in a store or scrolling an app as a free, fully rational chooser. You are standing inside an engineered behavioral environment built to provoke ancient tribal wiring with industrial precision. And if you have felt ashamed by how often you buy things you do not need, if you have watched a package arrive and felt the high collapse into a thin film of embarrassment, if you have looked around your home and wondered why it is full of evidence of impulses you barely remember having, then listen carefully. You're not broken. You're not lazy. You're not a sucker. Or, to put it even more bluntly in the language this system deserves, you're not broken/lazy/a sucker. You are a pattern-detecting machine being fed intentionally corrupted data. What looks like personal weakness is usually strategic manipulation, meeting biological vulnerability. This is not a moral failure. It is a forensic accounting of the psyche. You have probably been told some version of the willpower myth for most of your adult life. Spend less. Be disciplined. Stop impulse buying. Make a budget and stick to it. As if the problem is simply that you are some uniquely unserious person surrounded by superior humans who can walk through Target or open TikTok without their nervous system getting dragged into combat. But the willpower myth flatters the machine because it privatizes the blame. If you fail, the system remains innocent. If you overspend, the architecture disappears and only your character remains on trial. But that story is false. You do not live in a neutral environment where products politely present themselves and wait to be judged on utility. It must be meaningful if it costs this much. The line must be significant if it is this long. The drop must matter if it's sold out in 3 minutes. Your own discomfort becomes evidence against your own judgment, and the machine thrives in that confusion. The deeper problem is that you are not just buying objects. You are buying admission to invisible scripts. The script says, this item means you are current, competent, desirable, organized, serious, premium, adult, healed, optimized, tasteful, successful, creative, clean, disciplined, or ahead. The script says, your old version is obsolete, and the new version of you is one purchase away. The script says, progress looks like replacement, and that is where the progress illusion takes over. You have been trained to interpret upgrades as movement, even when they are downgrades in disguise. A new phone you did not need costs you 3 months of low-level financial tension. A larger apartment fills with more furniture, more subscription services, more climate control, more maintenance, more expectations. A luxury version of a basic item does not improve your life in proportion to its cost. It increases the amount of labor required to justify owning it. The object arrives as a promise and matures into an obligation. It is not uncommon to call this adulthood, but often it is just a more expensive version of captivity. There is an older story that explains this better than most financial advice ever will. Denis Diderot, the French philosopher, receives a beautiful scarlet robe. It is elegant, rich, refined, and immediately it makes everything else around him look coarse and unworthy. His desk now seems cheap. His furnishings now seem embarrassing. His room now appears misaligned with the new identity the robe implies. So one possession demands another, and another, and another, until a single upgrade reorganizes the entire ecosystem of his life. He becomes, in his own words, enslaved by his new things, or, as it is more commonly remembered, one becomes the slave of the things one acquires. This is the Diderot chain reaction, and you have lived it whether or not you know the name. You buy the expensive couch, now the rug looks wrong. You buy the luxury gymwear, now your old water bottle feels inconsistent. You buy the premium coffee setup, now the kitchen has to be upgraded to match the story. You buy the high-end skincare, now the bathroom counter has to perform a cleaner identity. One purchase is never one purchase because objects are not isolated in the mind. They are narrative anchors. They demand identity consistency, and identity consistency is expensive. The scarlet robe is still with you. It just comes in algorithmic colors now. This is why you cannot evaluate a purchase only by its sticker price. You have to evaluate the chain reaction it is likely to trigger. The initial spend is often the least important number. The real cost is what it recruits. The real cost is the new standard it installs. The real cost is how it makes your existing life look insufficient. That is how a box enters your home and becomes, metaphorically and sometimes almost literally, a vampire into your house. Not because the object itself is evil, but because it begins feeding on comparison, on maintenance, on accessories, on upgrades, on the subtle demand that your environment bend itself around its presence. These are vampire costs. They arrive after the purchase, when your defenses are down and your budget has already been emotionally spent. You see this same structure in the high-income poverty trap, which confuses people because it appears contradictory. How can someone make more money and feel less free? Because income does not solve the biological urge to spend when the identity engine remains untouched. Higher earnings often just upscale the theater. The person who once bought cheap impulse clutter now buys premium impulse clutter. The person who once used fast fashion for self-reinvention now uses investment pieces. The person who once binged on gadgets now binges on wellness, productivity, luxury basics, boutique fitness, artisanal food, ergonomic optimization, curated home aesthetics, invisible convenience fees, premium memberships, frictionless financing. More money without strategic rewiring does not produce peace. It produces more room for self-deception. You feel richer while becoming more structurally obligated. You acquire not just better stuff, but better rationalizations. The result is not abundance. It is polished entrapment. And then there's the architecture of confusion, which is more sophisticated now than most people realize. Prices have become incoherent not by accident, but by design. Start with quality erosion under inflation camouflage. A product keeps roughly the same shelf price, or perhaps rises modestly, but the material is thinner, the stitching weaker, the ingredients cheaper, the manufacturing less durable, the service thinner, the return policy meaner. You are told inflation is the story, but inflation becomes camouflage for degradation. You do not just pay more, you pay more for less. Then comes stealth inflation through tier compression. This is where the middle disappears. The budget line gets more expensive. The premium line gets normalized. The gap between them narrows just enough to make the premium feel worth it, while the baseline has already been dragged upward. Suddenly, the expensive option feels reasonable, not because it became rational, but because the cheap option was strategically worsened. And inside this haze, you get category confusion. Budget brands price themselves into premium territory. Premium brands release lower quality diffusion lines. Mid-market companies mimic luxury visual language while using mass-market materials. The signals get scrambled. Your internal pricing model, the quiet map you once had for what things should cost, begins to fail. A hoodie is $80, or $180, or $380, depending on whose story is attached to it. A candle is $12, or $68, or $90. Water bottles become cultural artifacts. Groceries become aspirational content. Skincare becomes theology. You are not imagining the confusion. The categories really are collapsing, and once your mental anchors are destabilized, you become easier to move. This is mathematical inevitability. If reference points are corrupted, judgment follows. That phrase matters more than it seems. Mathematical inevitability. Because once you see how these systems stack probabilities against you, you stop describing your behavior as random or impulsive in the moral sense. The machine does not need you to be foolish. It only needs repeated exposure, unstable reference points, frictionless payments, tribal pressure, engineered scarcity, identity cues, and a nervous system calibrated for belonging. Given enough repetitions, overspending stops looking like a mystery and starts looking like a forecast. Mathematical inevitability is what happens when enough small pressures align. That is why shame is such a useless response. Shame keeps the frame personal. It says, "What is wrong with me?" A better question is, what variables were loaded into this decision before I called it mine? Now look at value clinically, because this is where the spell weakens. The machine depends on emotional fog. It hates arithmetic. Consider the difference between prestige pricing and cost per use. Prestige pricing is not built to reflect material reality. It is built to manipulate perceived social value. If a luxury bag carries a 4,800% markup, you are not paying for leather and thread. You are paying for permission to borrow a symbol other people have also been trained to recognize. A symbol maintained by gatekeeping, advertising, scarcity theater, celebrity seeding, and relentless repetition. Call it what it is, quality signaling fraud. The bag may be beautiful, it may even be well made, but the gap between manufacturing cost and retail price is not a quality gap. It is an identity tax. Meanwhile, cost per use asks a boring question, and boring questions are often liberating. How many times will you realistically use this item? What does each use actually cost? How much maintenance does it require? What alternatives already exist in your life? Does it save time, reduce friction, improve health, preserve attention, or meaningfully increase freedom? Most status purchases fail this audit almost immediately. Not because they are aesthetically worthless, but because their price is tethered to social performance rather than personal utility. They are not tools, they are costumes. And this is the part people resist, because it sounds joyless until you understand it correctly. A forensic accounting of the psyche is not about stripping beauty from life. It is about separating beauty from manipulation. It is about distinguishing pleasure from programming. It is about learning to detect when desire is yours and when desire has been inserted into you through invisible scripts. You do not need to become ascetic. You need to become legible to yourself. You need to know when you are responding to function and when you are responding to shame, when you are paying for craftsmanship and when you are paying for witness, when you are solving a problem and when you are medicating an insecurity someone else activated for profit. You can test this in ordinary situations. Imagine you see a product and immediately want it. Before you ask whether you can afford it, ask a colder question. What problem appears in my mind if I do not buy this? Not in reality, in imagination. Do you fear inconvenience or inferiority? Do you fear being unprepared or being left behind? Do you want the item or the social frictionlessness you associate with it? Most unnecessary spending hides in that distinction. The object becomes a proxy for emotional regulation. The purchase promises to remove a tension that is actually relational or existential. The new organizer promises control. The wellness product promises discipline. The designer item promises legitimacy. The home upgrade promises adulthood. The trendy bottle promises inclusion. But the feeling does not last because the object was never actually matched to the wound. This is why the satisfaction curve is so short. The product solves the symbolic problem for a few hours, maybe a few days, and then the system generates a new deficiency. The engine cannot allow completion. If you felt finally enough, the market would lose a customer. This is also why more information alone does not save you. Plenty of intelligent people know they are being manipulated and still spend in ways that sabotage them. Awareness without pattern interruption is just spectatorship. You need strategic rewiring. You need to alter the sequence between stimulus and purchase. You need to slow down the transfer of narrative urgency into financial action. You need pattern detection, not vague self-improvement language. Pattern detection means you stop asking, "Do I want this?" and start asking, "What script is trying to run through me right now?" It means you notice the timing of your urges. After scrolling, after a bad day, after social comparison, after praise deprivation, after boredom, after feeling professionally invisible, after seeing somebody else become legible in a way you crave. Pattern detection means you realize your spending is often less about objects than about state management. Once you see the invisible equations, you cannot unsee them. Once you see the invisible scripts, they do not disappear, but they lose some of their mystical authority. They become what they always were, mechanisms. And this is where your identity shifts, not from spender to minimalist, not from indulgent to pure, but from consumer mark to architect of their own margin. Margin is not just money left over. Margin is psychological space. Margin is the ability to absorb a shock without panic. Margin is having choices your past self did not spend away. Margin is the right to be unimpressive on purpose. Margin is being able to say no to identity rent. The market wants all excess converted into signals. It wants every spare dollar turned into proof. Proof of taste, proof of relevance, proof of progress, proof of healing, proof of ambition. But freedom grows in what does not need to be displayed. The most powerful shift you can make is to stop treating money as a tool for public legibility and start treating it as stored optionality. That is not deprivation. That is self-respect. So when the next urge hits, and it will hit, you do not need a motivational speech. You need a procedure. This is the replacement test. If this item disappeared from the world tonight, what would actually happen? What existing object, habit, workaround, or inconvenience would replace it? How serious would the loss be in 7 days? In 30? In 90? If the answer is that a cheaper version, an older version, a borrowed version, or no version at all would cover the function, then what you are confronting is not necessity. It is narrative inflation. And if you want to go one step further, add the second layer. What else will this purchase quietly demand? Accessories, subscriptions, care, upgrades, matching items, attention, anxiety, justification, clutter, identity consistency. What will this invite into your life after the excitement fades? Ask that often enough, and half the market loses its charm. You are not trying to become immune to beauty, status, or desire. That is unrealistic and unnecessary. You are trying to stop confusing external signals with internal needs. You are trying to see that many upgrades are actually freedom reductions in premium packaging. You are trying to notice that every apparently harmless impulse contains a miniature worldview about who you are allowed to be and what you must buy to remain acceptable. Once you understand that, restraint stops feeling like punishment. It starts to feel like refusal, calm refusal, detached refusal. Not because you are above wanting things, but because you are no longer willing to finance every insecurity somebody else can activate. This is not anti-pleasure, it is anti-extraction. So the next time your chest tightens over a drop, a launch, a sale, a trend, a rebrand, a limited edition object that suddenly seems to contain the missing piece of your personality, pause. Notice the body first. Notice the social fear disguised as preference. Notice the ancient tribal wiring. Notice the cognitive price dissonance. Notice the quality signaling fraud. Notice the vampire costs hovering behind the product like polite ghosts. Notice the invisible scripts. Notice the mathematical inevitability the machine is trying to install. Then make the calculation cold. Do the forensic accounting of the psyche. Not to shame yourself, but to recover authorship. You were never weak for responding to patterns that were designed to capture you. You were only unarmed. Now, you are armed. Now you know that a market can study you, target you, flatter you, frighten you, and still fail to own you if you can see the architecture underneath its promises. Once you see the invisible equations of the consumer scam, you cannot unsee them. Once you stop calling it self-expression every time the market rents your identity back to you, something loosens. You breathe differently, you walk through the store differently, you scroll differently, you stop interpreting every desire as a command. You stop auditioning for belonging through receipts. You stop inviting a vampire into your house and calling it self-care. You start protecting your margin like it is part of your nervous system, because it is. And maybe for the first time in a long time, your life begins to feel less like a showroom and more like a place you actually live. Comment below, which viral trend did your amygdala almost trick you into buying? We are building the architecture underneath the machine.